As you can see, I still really haven't gotten my office set up yet. And I got these neon signs behind me that they are neon, and when I turn them on, my camera makes them all, and they don't look good. So I'm working on getting another camera as well. Until then, I'm going to keep telling scary stories. Welcome to Natty Ghosts. I am Matt, and this week I'm going to talk about my dad's place. So I've already spoken about the different places I've lived that were haunted, and now we're coming up to my dad's place. In 2019, my wife and I decided to move in with him because he's getting old and he lives on his own, and he lives on 60 plus acres in the country. He does have some neighbors, but they don't really ever check on him. Nobody really checks on anybody out there. I kind of felt like if something were to happen to him, nobody would know, and he wouldn't be able to get a hold of anybody. He doesn't have a home phone. He has a cell phone, and cell phone reception in his place is spotty at best. So in 2019, I decided I wanted to move in with him and just keep an eye on him. So my wife and I moved in with him. The first thing that happened was one night we went out to visit him to talk about moving in with him. And he didn't have any lights on in his place except for a little lamp next to his chair. And the TV was on. So we were sitting in the living room with him, kind of just hanging out. And from the living room, we could see into the kitchen. We could see the refrigerator. If the refrigerator opened, it lit up the whole space, the living room and the kitchen. So at one point he said, "I have some beer in the fridge if you would like one." So I got up and I went into the kitchen, went into the fridge, and he had a 6-pack of bottles in the little cardboard container in the fridge. I reached in and I grabbed a bottle out of the container, didn't even touch the container, and I went back to the living room, sat down. About a half an hour later, he said, "I think I'll get a beer too." So he went into the kitchen and he yelled, "Well, you could have put them away. They're going to get warm." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "The beer, you set them on the counter and just left them there." I said, "I didn't do that. I didn't even touch the container. I just grabbed a beer out of the fridge." So apparently at some point, the beer, the 6-pack container, had removed itself from the refrigerator and set itself on the counter next to the refrigerator, but we never saw the refrigerator open, never saw the light from it. So either the 6-pack moved itself through the refrigerator or the door opened, but the light never came on, and we didn't even hear the refrigerator shut. That was the first sign that things were a little strange there. We lived with him from 2019 until 2021 through the pandemic. And of course, all of 2020, none of us ever left the house. So we had a lot of time to experience certain things. Something that happens there quite often is things disappearing and reappearing in weird places, if they reappear at all. I had quite a large DVD collection, and every now and then I would see one was missing, and sometimes it would reappear, sometimes it didn't. I think I lost about a dozen DVDs over those 2 years that I never found again. Sometimes I would find a DVD in another DVD case that it shouldn't be in. The TV remote was one that liked to disappear all the time and show up in weird places. And that's something that my dad said has been going on for a very long time. The original owner of the house that my dad was taking care of too, an older man who owned the property. See, the property used to be a pay lake and campground that the old man ran. And he retired, it's been over 10 years now, shut the place down and turned it into a private residence. And the people who lived in the campground part, who rented campers from him permanently, they all eventually moved out, and my dad was the last one. He had a permanent place there for many years. He would travel to Florida in the winter, come back in the summer, and he always had a place to go. But because he was always traveling, he didn't need like a home. He just needed a place to stay every now and then. So this old man, being a long time friend, let him stay there. But after he retired and closed the place, he needed some help. He was getting up in age. His wife had passed on. And so my dad decided to stay with him in the house and make sure he took his medication, got him to doctor's appointments if he needed to. Even he knew something was going on with the house and had known for many, many years. And he always complained about the TV remote disappearing. One day in particular, my dad, he was home alone. I'm not sure where me and my wife were at, but he went in to make something for lunch. He turned the oven on, got in the freezer, got something out, put it on a baking sheet, and he went to turn on the TV, but he couldn't find the remote. So he turned the TV on at the TV, and then he remembered that he had a pan in the oven and he had to get it out. So he went, opened the oven, and there was the remote on the pan in the oven. Why was it in there? Nobody knows. Possibly the creepiest thing to happen while we were there was we heard a mimic. And if you're not sure what a mimic is just that. It mimics other people. And sometimes only one person in a room will hear the mimic. But we all heard it at different points. So my wife and I spent a lot of time in our bedroom, and I would hear my dad call my name. And I would yell out, "Yeah," but I would get nothing back. So I would go out and say, "Did you just call me?" And he'd say, "No, I didn't call you." Sometimes I would go out and find that he wasn't even there. Sometimes my wife would hear him call her, and I wouldn't hear it. She wouldn't hear it when I heard it. Sometimes I'd be in the living room with my dad watching TV, and I would hear my wife call me from the bedroom, and I would go back to ask what she wanted. She'd say, "I didn't call you," or she'd be sleeping. We heard this all the time, literally every day, many times a day. And it got to the point where we just stopped responding. You know, if he really wants me, he'll call me again. This is something that had been going on, like I said, for a long time. Years ago, I remember my dad telling me that they would hear car doors shut, or they would hear a car come down the drive, which is kind of a long lane and it's gravel, and you can definitely hear somebody coming down that lane. And they would go out to look to make sure somebody wasn't trespassing, but nobody would be there. And sometimes he would hear a car door shut right outside of his camper, and he would go out and look, and nobody would be there. So one night, my dad was sitting outside reading a book. His place was right on a lake, and next to his place was like a fishing shanty. If you're familiar, we call them shelters. It's just like a tin, three-sided, freestanding little shelter to keep you out of the rain if it starts raining when you're fishing. And he said this guy walked around this shelter and scared him. And he said, "Can I help you?" And the guy said, "Yeah, I haven't been here in a while. I thought I'd stop by and see how it's doing." So they talked for a little while. The guy asked how the owner and his wife were doing, and at the time, they were both still alive. So my dad said, "They're good. They're up at their house right now if you want to go talk to them." And the guy said, "No, it's okay. I'm just going to be on my way." And he walked back around the shelter. The thing is, on the other side of the shelter is not the way out. And this 60 plus acres is surrounded by farmland, and they are many miles away from the nearest town. My dad heard no cars, and he doesn't know where the guy walked off to because he was heading in a direction where there was nothing for a long way. So that was weird. And he told the owners about the guy, and the owner, the old man, he remembered everybody who came out there. He had a picture frame memory. He could remember what everybody looked like. He knew names. And he said he couldn't recall, at least with my dad's description, who this guy was. But the guy knew them, and he called them by name when he asked how they were doing. So some time went by. My dad had already told me about that encounter, and he was a little freaked out by it. And it happened again one night. The guy walked around the shelter again, scared my dad. They had another conversation, and once again, my dad said, "You can go up and say hi to them." And he said, "No, I gotta go." and he walked back around the shelter. But that time, my dad jumped up from his chair and he went around the shelter and he saw nobody anywhere. No idea who that guy was, where he came from, or where he went. And those are the only 2 times he's ever been seen. After my wife and I moved out, my dad told me that for a long time he continued to hear noises coming from our bedroom, loud bangs. He said it sounded like a big piece of furniture fell over onto the floor. And he would go back and look, and nothing would be out of place. There's really nothing back there to fall over, to make a noise, but that's what he would hear. And for a time, he would hear knocking on the wall, down by the floor, as if it was coming from outside. And he would go outside to look, but nobody would be there. And all along that wall outside are bushes and shrubs. It would be very hard to knock on the home from the outside. But he would hear it all the way down the wall back to our bedroom. Another time he came home for lunch and he was in the house, and as soon as he walked in, he heard somebody from our bedroom yell, "Who is that?" And he thought it was me. So he went back to look. Nobody was there. One other thing that happened while we were there, I was outside with my dog, and I heard our cat, who was just a kitten at the time, in the front bedroom of the home that my wife used for her office. And I heard him meowing loudly, which he still does at great length. And then I heard these bangs coming from the other end of the home rather fast. And it sounded like footsteps, but heavy bangs, and not really footsteps, not like stomps, but just bangs, boom, 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 all the way into the front room. And when they got there and they stopped, he screamed like he was scared at something or by something. I went back in and couldn't find him for a while. That's my dad's place, and we have no idea what would be causing any of this. As far as I know, it has been a campground and pay lake for like 40 or 50 years before it closed about 10 years ago. And it hasn't been anything since but a private residence. And before that, I don't think it was anything but just land. So if you have any ideas, let me know. It's a really weird place out there. All right, that's all I got for this week. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.